We're now going to take a look at gas over oil suspension systems. You'll see this on off-highway. Gas is a nitrogen gas that they use on the suspension system. So, for instance, if we take a look at a skidder, the skidder as it's traveling needs some type of a suspension system between the front and the back. So they use what's called a cushion hitch. So the cushion hitch has two positions. So they don't want the suspension system working as they're scraping, because then they can't get a nice even scrape. So what they have is they have a lockdown position. So inside the cab they'll have a lever that they can go in the lockdown position, and what it does is dumps all the oil out of the suspension system and allows it to lock it down in a position where they can make a nice scrape. But then once they finish scraping, then they move the lever, and now the suspension can lift up so that they have some spring left in it. So again, how it's set up, so inside the cab we have a lever, and it will allow the cushion hitch to drop down and lock in position, so we have no suspension system at all. And how it's set up is inside here we have an accumulator or two, depending on the type of the system. And the accumulator, once it's charged with nitrogen, it either adds the oil or dumps the oil for the suspension system. So if we remove all the oil, the suspension system is going to lock itself in place. And once we're ready for the suspension system, we open up the valve and it pumps oil back into the suspension system, so that we now have that spring action back inside. So here we have our two accumulators, our lock cylinder. So again, when we're traveling, this is in the up position, and so this is actually where our shock absorber is, and our accumulators are using that to counteract and absorb that shock load. Again, we're using nitrogen because it's dry. Now there are some suspension systems that we have on different types of off-road equipment, and some of the things we have to pay attention to. So the other thing is, when we're adding nitrogen to the system, we have to be aware of the temperature. So as the temperature changes, we also have to adjust the pressure of our nitrogen. So adjusting accumulators on these systems, again, we always, when we're doing them, if there's a pair, same one thing when we're doing suspensions, if we have a pair of suspensions for the rear, we charge them together, so we manifold them together. There are some applications where we may charge all four, front and rear, together. But we always charge the rears together, and we always charge the fronts together. So if we have an air spring, and this is again liquid over nitrogen or nitrogen over oil suspension systems, there's going to be a warning tag somewhere on an accumulator, again, to warn you that there's high pressure in there. So making sure that we follow the directions on how to charge these accumulators or rear suspension properly so we don't get hurt. So on, again, some vehicles, they may use a rubber block type of suspension. They have what's called a hard pan rod, and that just basically keeps the upper frame in alignment with the drive axles and allows it to move independently. When we get into some of the bigger vehicles that have our shock absorbers on the back, again, we have to pay attention to these. Now, again, we've got to say I want to check the oil level in this. It's something we may have to do from time to time because of the oil that they use. It may get past a seal. So to check the oil level in these, there are certain ways to do it, and you've got to be aware of how to do it so you don't get hurt. Number one is we have to drain all the nitrogen out of the system. Now what happens then is the box is going to drop. We can't just go and check the oil because now all that oil is going to come out. So we have to support the box somehow. At the mine we had a crane. We could hold the box up to a certain point. We could check the oil level, and if it was low we could add it up or top it up. And then what we would do is we would then lower it down, and then we would add the nitrogen to the system. And what we measured was, on the backs, is what was the distance between here and here. And once, again, we manifold them so both of them were done together, so that they would both raise up. And once we measured our dimension, we got it right, we knew it was good, we shut off the nitrogen, and the vehicle was able to go back into service. So again, before we even attempt to do any work on this, make sure you read the instructions on how to do it properly so you don't get hurt. Now, when we're going to be taking these out of here, remember, they have nitrogen and oil in them. They're going to try and push apart. If I want to take these out of the vehicle, be very careful. Make sure, number one, that you drain the nitrogen out of them, and you support the box before you even try and remove those pins. We get on some of the bigger vehicles, you take a look at how big this shock absorber assembly is. So something like this, if we're not paying attention, it can kill you. So always follow the instructions, make sure we do it properly. Okay, front suspension's exactly the same thing. They're going to have a tag on somewhere. Most of them are worn off, so again, you're going to have to read the service manual on how to charge this. And again, before we remove them, we have to get rid of the nitrogen and support the vehicle so we can get those out of there without damaging or hurting ourselves. And again, both fronts would be charged at the same pressure, so they both have the same height. Okay, I think that's all the warning I have on those ones to pay attention to. We won't go into rebuilding them, and again, if we take a look at how they're set up, it's inside, it's just like a piston, and what we're doing is we're adding our nitrogen gas as a shock absorber, because remember, oil is not compressible where a gas is, so we can compress that gas and use that as a shock absorber. All right, warning labels. Again, remove this cover and the valve will cause the truck to drop suddenly if not properly blocked. So pay attention to the warning signs. Don't just dive in there and try and fix something. So again, warning labels get worn off or they get painted over. Make sure that you understand how you're to service these before you start.